The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the 7th and final day of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in June 2021 in northern New Mexico, with sporadic fires all around, it seems. One has been, I don't know if it's been put out, but it's at least been restrained. We don't know what the other one is or what the source of it is, but they're close enough that there's smoke, obvious smoke from nearby fires. It's New Mexico in the summer, and this is one of the things we have to deal with. Many places in the Southwest are vulnerable to fire, and there have been fierce fires, taking lives, and taking property. A good lesson in letting go. We wouldn't wish it on anyone, but it is happening. So today, having spent the sesshin really spelling out a lot about the process of coming to awakening and what is essentially as part of the process, how to make your best efforts, what kinds of things have to be overcome, and so on and so forth. And now I'd like to speak to something that is equally important in practice. In fact, perhaps even more important than practice coming to awakening. Torei Enji, who was the Dharma successor, the first Dharma successor of Hakuin, and he was barely 30 years old when that happened. He'd been a monk since he was 8, questioning, deeply committed to the practice. And he had already had a kensho by the time he came to practice with Hakuin when he was in very early 20s. And as you've heard in previous teishos, when he was 26, I think it was, he experienced severe illness, and the doctors gave up on him. There's some thought that it might have been TB, which is rampant in Japan in those days in particular, it being such a cold, damp country. And he had endeavored to do an extremely intense ascetic, extended period of practice. It goes to show that the middle way is really important, but the middle way is balanced. It's not heavy on the lax side. It's not heavy on the intensity side. It's really an exploration of our mind. It's an uncovering of this amazing, profound beingness that we are, pure, filled with compassion and joy, and even beyond that, limpid, transparent, unimpeded clarity. It takes a long time to reach that, to uncover it fully, lifetimes really, but how incredible it is to be on the path, even in this one. So Torei was a very serious Zen practitioner. And when he learned that he was probably at death's door, or at least that the doctors were giving up on him, they said, even if he did survive, he wouldn't live very long. Well, in the end, he lived into his 70s. But when he was 26, he decided that what he needed to do was rest. And obviously, he could still continue to practice, because practice is an experience of subtle questioning in our own mind. It's an exploration of our mind. It does not require physical stamina. If we have physical stamina, so much the better. But it doesn't require it. It doesn't require really anything but an openness to possibility and a need to know, a need to be free. Over the centuries, practice has taken form in different countries. And we have the traditional seated positions that we inherited from, well, basically from India, but through Japan. And we have the ways of working with our mind to help enhance the practice, go deeper, in particular, this extended out breath. And the rest of it is up to us, really. But as we continue to deepen our practice, there is something that is concurrently vital to do. And let me share a little bit from Kalu Rinpoche's teachings as found in Luminous Mind, The Way of the Buddha, about this. It's under the category of living Dharma in daily life. One who thinks and acts to achieve his own ends in the is a worldly being. One who thinks and works for others' welfare alone is a Dharma practitioner. That's by Jang Gung Kongtro Lodro Taye, in another Tibetan practitioner. Kalu Rinpoche says, the crucial point of Dharma practice, the heart of the teachings, is the mind. Body and speech proceed from mind. The mind forms the body, which possesses the faculty of speech. Mind is the root of all we are and all we do. It is both the source and the goal of all practice. So in all our activities, the most important thing is our state of mind, the intention that produces action. Motivation is vital. And then he goes on to speak of basically the Eightfold Noble Path, right motivation being the first step. That said, our motivation waxes and wanes. And it's important not to feel distressed by this. We encounter all manner of challenges in practice, both negative and positive. And it's important to continue. And the practice also is not limited to the Zendo. The practice is available and hopefully ongoing in every moment. You're sitting in your traffic, waiting for a traffic light to change so you can continue going. And to sit with the subtle openness to possibility that what you are perceiving, there may be something deeper than that. What you're feeling, there may be something deeper and more free and more clear than that. What is it? Before you go to bed, or as you're going to bed, it's an incredible time for a deepening of practice, because in those moments, just as you're about to drift off into sleep, the normal yada, the more normal me-ness begins to let go. The same as when we are beginning to wake up. And so those are really open doors to practice. And holding that space with openness to possibility can take your practice very deep. It's an incredible opportunity. I'd like to share with you a little bit now from Torei Enji in this book, A Discourse on the Inexhaustible Lamp, which is an incredible manual of practice, really. It's available through the London Zen Center in England at a relatively reasonable price. I think it's like $45. If you try to buy it on Amazon, you'll find it costing close to $1,000. But it is a book that I highly recommend, particularly this particular version of it. You can get the same, not the same, but you can get a translation of the same document by Torei, translated by an American translator on Amazon for pretty decent price, but it lacks the commentary from the contemporary, 20th century contemporary Zen master, Rinzai Zen master Daibi, that this particular book has, and which is very, very helpful. So we're going to jump way in. As you can see, it's quite a thick book. We're going to jump in towards the end to chapter 6, which is advanced practice. And Torei says the one way of advanced practice is letting go of the body. This is called the one salient point the patriarchs cannot transmit. Hanzan says 1,000 sages cannot transmit the one way of advanced practice. Trainees who play with forms only are just like monkeys grabbing at reflections. It is also called the final phase. And Daibi comments, having one by one penetrated the barred gates of Buddhan patriarchs, there still remains the one salient point of the final advanced practice. Genuine trainees must take this extra step toward. The old masters already advised pondering on the truth repeatedly and undergoing Sanzen study on these sayings of the patriarchs that are hard to penetrate. These are the koans. Because the one salient point handed down from the patriarch to patriarch is concealed in the gist of the koan, it is essential to undergo the bitter hardship of genuine Sanzen study under a teacher of clear insight, so as to grasp this one salient point. It is also known as the one way of advanced practice, letting go of the body, or as the final phrase, or also as the final affinity link. From the beginning, this has never been handed down from father to son. Master Hoseki of Hanzan says, not even 1,000 sages can transmit the one way of advanced practice. Trainees who merely play with forms are like monkeys grabbing at reflections. This one way of advanced practice has not been transmitted through Bodhidharma, through any of the historical patriarchs, and is not known by parent or child. It is not something that can be transmitted. And yet it is your own, very own being. And you can realize it. And it is important. The koan work is also known as the post-satori practice. We struggle through our practice. It begins to get easier as we get a sense of it. And the practice, of course, waxes and wanes in its intensity, and that's just normal. Persistence is vital. And not to sit down and relax when things get easy, because that's a very dangerous point. It's when things are challenging that it can be most fruitful in the practice. And we get to a point where suddenly we break through to a deeper understanding. And that point, we're able to work on subsequent koans. And we continue working on these koans. There are over 1,000 of them. In fact, 1,780 is the traditional number, but often these koans have koans within koans. And to work with these with a a person who has already worked with them effectively under another master is highly productive. We continue our deepening, we continue to broaden our practice, our opening through this koan work. And then there's also what is known as the long maturation. The long maturation starts the moment you do your Zen practice. You start your Zen practice. In fact, it can even start before. It's about transforming your behavior, your outlook, your perceptions to fit more with reality. And given that we are conditioned human beings, as was expressed in earlier teishos in this sesshin, we have a lot of material to work through, but it can be done. And as it is being done, it is so incredibly freeing and so amazing. And not only is it incredibly freeing to us, it's also incredibly freeing to other people, because how we are, how we act, whether we respond or react, what we do affects all of life. So let's share what Torei says about the long maturation. Master Engo said, a monk must always meditate on and fully come to understand death and birth. He must ever strive to dissolve the hindrances with genuine insight, and must clearly complete and verify the great affinity links transmitted by Buddha and patriarchs. Do not chase after fame, but rather keep back and remain sincere. The more you keep quiet and hold yourself aloof, the more all the holy heavenly dragons try to chase you out. So it can be a challenging point in practice. And yet, I think of Hakuin's grandfather in Zen, Shido Bunan, of the famous story where he was, as a middle-aged monk, celibate monk, in the 1600s in Japan, accused of fathering a child with an unwed mother. And the girl insisted that he was the father. Turns out, actually, he wasn't, but that wasn't to come out for another year when the girl had second thoughts about the whole situation. But as the pregnancy continued and finally into birth, the grandparents took the baby to Shido Bunan, I'm sure with a great deal of upsetness, let's say, possibly rage, and presented this infant to him and saying, you know, you're the father, you deal with this. And it's impossible for us as Westerners, particularly as modern Westerners, to understand the seriousness of this experience. In Japan, even now, the culture is one of community and harmony. And for one person to do something to upset the community's harmony is anathema. And one is normally scorned and left to themselves, shunned when one does something like that. And that's exactly what happened to him. His role, or his supposed role, was one of severely embarrassing both the family and the village. And he was deeply realized at that point. So when the baby arrived with the irate grandparents, all they said was "soka," which in Japanese is an extremely humble way of saying, oh, looks like that, doesn't it? And he simply received the baby, no objections. I mean, if the mother is saying he's the father, how's he to object anyway? raises it for a year, carries it around on his back like an old grandmother. It was an extremely difficult year for him because he had no real means of support. As I said, the village shunned him. I'm not quite sure how he even managed to eat. And there he was, a middle-aged man who had no experience with infants. And, and yet you can be sure that he cared tenderly for that child. After a year, the girl confessed who the father really was. It was one of the local boys. And so now the parents are even more embarrassed, and they go and ask for the baby back. And he simply again says, Soka. It appears thus, doesn't it? No attempts to defend himself. What was the point? He had no investment in being somebody that they would respect or somebody that they would not accuse or any of that. It's a very deeply let go way of being. And in that very let go way of being, it's not being a doormat. If there were anything that could have been done to change the situation harmoniously, he would have done it. But it was very clear that there was no way to do that. And he expressed profound acceptance of his karma. Can we do that? Our culture is such that, number one, that's me, is the most important being in the universe these days. Unfortunately, it leads to a lot of strife, a lot of challenge, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. And is it accurate? And is it essential? The more deeply we go into our practice, the more we realize that this idea of being somebody in particular is an artifice, that who we really are is this profound mind of clarity, transparency, and unimpededness. And to live from that is to live in a most peaceful, effective, joyful way. And when we are able to access the awareness of that presence, things change, and it affects beings all around us. It takes a lot to reach there. We, in a moment of awakening, have a tiny glimpse of it, but then, of course, the habit patterns of greed, anger, and delusion, the habit pattern of a self-image come rolling back in, and then we have some real work to do. Let's continue. Daivi comments. The long maturation of the Holy Womb is the cultivation, nourishing, and training after attaining the way. In other words, after a Kensho experience, but not necessarily so. After setting foot on the path, really. This depends on the individual affinity links, and therefore it does not matter whether this retirement is on a lonely mountain or in the marketplace, in village or city. Essential is only the training at all times and in all places. Master Torei already said in the preface, now, whether withdrawn on a mountain or retired in a city, essential at all times and in all places is the long maturation. To this purpose, it helps to keep the illustrious examples of the old masters in mind. Otherwise, we're liable to be pulled back into the dust and delusion of the world. By the way, pulled back into the dust and the delusion of the world, right in the midst of a traffic jam. We can be free. of the dust and delusion in the world. Right in the midst of being accused of something we didn't do that has difficult ramifications. We can become free. We can be free so that we can receive the experience as Shirobunan did. It's very difficult to express how amazing this experience can be, how freeing. And in freeing ourselves, we impact in such positive ways countless other beings. In order to point out directly the circumstances of the long maturation, Master Torei quotes Master Engo. Now, a monk must always meditate and fully come to understand the matter of death and birth. Zen trainees should always diligently ponder the one great matter of birth and death. An old master also advises the affixing the two words birth and death onto the forehead, and to seek escape from them as if one's head was on fire. Striving to dissolve the hindrances with genuine insight, yes, but when expressed from the first principle of the school, insight is itself the obstacle, and it can be. Hakuin experienced that. He had that deep kensho, relatively deep kensho, but certainly not anywhere near complete kensho experience when he was striving during that lecture meeting, when he went and sat in a shed on his own and just dug into his practice. And at the sound of the big bell being rung in the morning, had an awakening experience. But he assumed that that awakening experience was the most incredible, deep awakening experience anyone had had in 300 years. It just went straight to massaging his ego. I have known people who got very big into the idea that they had kensho, which is kind of ridiculous because every single one of us is endowed with this amazing, clear mind. And every single one of us, if we work hard enough, and that doesn't mean this kind of working, it means gently questioning, searching deeply in whatever moment there is to search, which can be quite a few moments during the day, whether or not you're sitting on your seat in the zendo. Therefore, pulling Satori out from Satori and rooting out completely insight as well as understanding, that is, must clearly complete and confirm the great affinity links transmitted by Buddha and patriarchs. Unless pursued to that extent, this great affinity link cannot be attained. It is important. Kensho experience is only how can we put it? Before Kensho, we're struggling in the dark. After Kensho, we have a little bit of light to see. It's like we've lit a candle and now we can see a little bit further, a little bit wider. But we need to not just light one candle, but light a whole slew of candles. Bring out the sun so that we can truly see deeply. And then it's not just the seeing, it's also the manifesting of that in our behavior. To that end, we have the 6 paramitas as models, as sort of guides in a way. And they are, actually sometimes they're listed as 10, but the 10 actually can be subsumed by the 6. And they are generosity, Giving without expecting anything in return. The essence of non-attachment. Shido Bunan, taking care of that infant without expecting anything in return. That is true giving. I have a friend who, when she was in grade school, the teacher said, and talking about generosity, said, one of the most beautiful things is to give something that you treasure deeply. So she ran home and took her most favorite toy and gave it to a friend. And she told me that she had such a joyous experience doing that. She felt so joyful, so happy giving that toy away. Discipline, which is also called sila. It's also considered to be appropriate behavior. In other words, it's about not taking advantage of people. It's about well, being an upright citizen. And the comment here, this is from an article in the Lion's Roar magazine. You joyfully practice the Dharma in everything you do. So you're an expression of the Dharma. You're an expression of awakened mind to the degree that you can be. And you don't have to try to be that. It naturally unfolds as a result of your practice. Then there is patience. It's sometimes called patient endurance. You're free of aggression and maintain your equilibrium in the midst of samsara's confusion. Fourth, exertion. You work hard because you delight in the path and appreciate virtue. Overcoming laziness, you never give up. You keep persisting. You keep persisting. That can be a challenge in practice. Sometimes we hit a point where we're suddenly disenchanted with practice. I remember a sesshin many, many years ago where I got to the 7th day of sesshin and I could have cared less that I was in sesshin. I could have cared less about Zen practice. I could have cared less about Zen. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. The next sesshin I went to, because in those days I was able to go to every single possible sesshin, and it happened on the 6th day. And the subsequent sesshin, it happened on the 5th day. I just began to see the pattern in this, and I was not really interested in walking through the dry landscape of my mind for 7 days, which is what it was looking like it was going to eventually become. So I went to talk to Kalu Rinpoche. And in those days, in order to talk to Kalu Rinpoche, you had to first tell his secretary, who happened at the time to be Bowden, who is now the abbot and has been the abbot of, well, I guess they're now changing the title to spiritual director of the Rochester Zen Center. And so I explained what had happened and said I wanted to talk to Roshi about it. He said he would relay the information to Roshi and get back to me with the answer. And he got back to me with the answer, and it was Roshi would not see me. So I thought, oh, okay. Well, I guess I have to figure this one out myself. And then to cap the experience, the next sesshin, and as I said, I was always going to every single sesshin I would apply. In those days, there were always people that did not get into sesshin because there would be over 100 people trying to get into sesshin, applying to sesshin, And the Zendo could take at most 60. And that's with people sitting kitty corner in the corners. So the next sesshin, I was not on the accepted list. And my heart sank. Because I realized that I really did want to come to awakening, despite what I had felt in those 3 sesshins. And thankfully, the next sesshin, I was accepted. And it was not long after that that I was passed on my breakthrough koan, which says to me that I had gotten to a certain point in my practice. And it got to be a little bit too dangerous. As I've said so many times, we want very much to become free. We have this sense that there's something we can awaken to that is vital, and more vital than perhaps anything else in our life or the world. And so we start practice. And initially, there are challenges, of course, and we gradually work with the challenges, and our practice goes gradually deeper. And then at a point, it reaches the edge of that cliff, that metaphorical cliff, where we're called upon to let go our self-image, which essentially is to die, metaphorically to die. Not necessarily physically to die, but metaphorically to die. And it can be as frightening as considering dying whenever we have to do it. And so suddenly, the part of us that's invested in the status quo, the part of us that is invested in the self-image, puts the skids on and comes up with all manner of seemingly convincing ways to avoid going deeper. And that was a major part of that. Because once I overcame it, realized that I really did want to come to awakening, somehow it shifted. So be aware that at a certain point in time in your practice, as you go deeper, you too may find yourself suddenly supremely discouraged or suddenly attracted to anything else but the practice. And right at that point, to really practice that openness to possibility. And it will, in its time, let go. And you'll be in a different place, much closer to coming to Kensho. Kensho, by the way, just means seeing into the nature of reality. It's not final liberation, but it's definitely a big step. It makes a huge difference. And it makes it a bit easier, in my experience, to practice after that. So that was exertion. Meditation. Body and mind synchronized, you cut distraction and tame your mind with one pointed mindfulness. And again, we have to really be careful about the wording, because we're taught to cut. And what that means is to let go. It doesn't mean chop. And that's important. We can develop a great deal of tension in our practice if we're trying to chop our thoughts and get rid of our thoughts and force ourselves into some ideal mind state that we assume is going to be awakening. It's about exploration. It's about curiosity. It's about openness to possibility under every circumstance. And that's a practice, particularly when combined with the extended out breath. This openness to possibility is a practice that can be done regardless of circumstances. regardless of physical health, regardless of what you have to do in your life, there are always moments where there's the chance to open to possibility. We all have to go to the bathroom. That takes a few minutes at least, or a minute or two. And that's an optimal time right there. It's also an optimal time during your day to stop and do one focused, concentrated, extended out breath as if it were your last. And with that openness to possibility. Then the sixth is wisdom. You develop this, quote, superior knowledge of both ultimate reality and relative phenomena. As prajna cuts through mistaken beliefs about reality, compassion naturally arises. And that's what happens as we continue our practice. We open to our innate compassion as well as our innate wisdom. It is a long, ongoing practice, but it is quite fruitful if we persist, and it is unbelievably worth it. And we have a sense of that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting, trying to deal with what comes up, trying to open our mind in a format that has no real obvious instructions. It's simply not like your average school class. And because we're dealing with something beyond the usual way of knowing things, necessarily it is so. The main point is to continue the faith, continue the practice, work with a teacher. That's extremely helpful, because the teacher is just somebody who's been one step ahead of you, that's all, and has a sense of experience with the pitfalls, with the struggles, with the challenges, and can help a person move through those. So on these last hours of sesshin, and it's practically just minutes, but we will be going till after 8 o'clock tonight and ending with the final tea. Right now is the most optimal time to practice, because you've been at it for however long. Even if you've only been at it for this last couple of days, there still has been increasing depth, deepening progress. And every step counts, every minute counts. Be gentle with yourself, be curious. Be curious and keep going. No matter what happens, keep going, because freedom is there. It's built in. We only need to uncover it. And I've seen some amazing transformations. You can do it too. I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the Four Vowels. And by the way, the teishos from the other days are now up on YouTube. If you've subscribed to the channel, you'll naturally get the information. Shu Jomuhen Segando Bono Mujin Segandan Homon Muryo Segan Gaku Butsudo Mujo Seganjo Shujo Muhen Segando Bono Mujin Segandan Homon Muryo Segan Gaku Butsudo Mujo Seganjo Shujo Muhen Segando Bono Mujin Segandan Homon Muryo Segan Gaku Butsudo Mujo Seganjo. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to liberate them. Clinging is inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to it. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to master them. The way of liberation is unsurpassable. I vow to become it.